Yeah. Hi everyone, welcome to Big Ed Books. My name is Richie. Really excited to have this reading called It's Real Life. Today it's the third installment of our reading series. We started the reading series back in December. Sort of a play reading series here once every month. I'm just going to read Paul's bio because it's quite long. I think it's in fact quite longer than the play. And then I'm going to turn it over to the cast. Okay. Paul Levinson, PhD, is professor of communication and media studies at Fordham University. His nonfiction books, including The Soft Edge, Digital McLuhan, Real Space, Cell Phone, New Media, McLuhan in Age of Social Media, and Fake News in Real Context, have been translated into 15 languages. His science fiction novels include The Silk Code, winner of the Locus Award for Best First Science Fiction Novel of 1999, Borrowed Tides, The Consciousness Plague, The Pixel Eye, The Plot to Save Socrates, Unburning Alexandria, Chronica, and Its Real Life, An Alternate History of the Beatles. The first chapter of which, published as a short story, won the Mary Shelley Award for Best Fiction in 2023. His award-nominated novella, The Chronology Protection Case, was made into a short film and is on Amazon Prime Video. He has appeared on CBS News, CNN, MSNBC, the Discovery Channel, National Geographic, the History Channel, and NPR. His 1972 album, Twice Upon a Rhyme, was reissued in 2010, and his new album, Welcome Up, Songs of Space and Time, was released in 2020. Please welcome Paul Levinson.
Thank you, Richie. That was a great reading. I used to have Fox News like among the places I listed where I appeared, but I decided I could no longer live with it. Yeah. So let me first give you some background as to what you're going to hear, and then I'm going to introduce our acting crew, and then we'll get right into the reading. The story, It's Real Life, that I converted and expanded into a novel is indeed an alternate history story. It starts in the mid-90s, and the lead character is Pete Fornatale, who I'm sure many of you remember was a disc jockey on WNEW-FM. Before that, he had a show called Mixed Bag on WFUV, and then he had the good sense to come back to Fordham and be back on WFUV. So I didn't get to Fordham until the late 1990s, but I did make a point of getting to know Pete. And like so many people, he left this earth far too young. And that's one of the reasons why I situated the story in the mid-90s, because Pete was still very much alive and active. And as we get into the very opening pages of the story, we realize that Pete is somehow in a different reality than the one we're currently in right now. It's a reality in which Pete feels like a tug on his heart every time he hears a Beatles song sung by John Lennon doing lead, called It's Real Life. And he doesn't know why he feels that. There's something in that song that bothers him. And he has an appointment downtown, takes a trip on the train, gets out at Grand Central Terminal, and very quickly discovers that he has entered another reality. A reality in which John Lennon was murdered in 1980. In other words, our reality. And this sets up the whole following story. Pete first tries to make sense of what's going on. He learns that there are different realities. He learns how to get through one reality to another. He meets all kinds of people, including some real people, including someone by the name of Suzanne, who Leonard Cohen talked about in his wonderful song. A woman who claims that she is that Suzanne. And the novel in general is populated with as many real people as I could put into the novel. And that gets us to this reading and why I'm so excited about it. Because two of the real people in the novel are standing right next to me. This is Anthony Marinelli, the playwright. the actress. Now, one of the projects that Anthony is working on, in my view, much too slowly, is making an adaptation out of another one of my novelettes called Marilyn and Monet. That's Marilyn Monroe and Claude Monet. And it's like it is a time travel story of sorts. And as soon as I saw Amanda play Marilyn Monroe in another one of Anthony's plays, Max and Domino is the name of it, right? I knew she'd be perfect for it. And as you can see, all we have to do is get a blonde wig. And she would be absolutely
It's in store.
perfect.
She'd be willing to diet too, just
Absolutely. Now, we're also really fortunate, and I feel very lucky to be joined here by another great actress, Denise Reed.
Oh.
My wife and I are devoted watchers of FBI on CBS. It's like one of the few network shows we watch, and it's a very, very good show. And Denise played a nanny in a 2004 episode. And in fact,
2024. I'm not.
right, good. Quite cool for like a tiny little baby.
Just a baby.
She's also worked on Saturday Night Live for a few
Behind
years.
the camera.
Behind the camera, but still, that's impressive.
They won't let me in front of them.
And she told me she auditioned for a part in Zero Day, which I just saw on Netflix the other day, and she would have fit in perfectly.
Thank you.
in that great
Call the
cast.
casting and let them know what a mistake
I definitely. And lurking there in the corner, someone that many of you already know, Frank LoBuono. He's a colleague of mine at Fordham University. He has a great podcast called Being Frank. It's the only way to be. And as Hudson River Radio often correctly says in one of their promos, it beats listening to nothing. So Frank has given this event all kinds of help. He set up this video. Probably most of you are here because you know Frank. Thank you very much. And we're all delighted that you're all here. And we managed to rope Frank in to this cast, so he's going to be reading several lines as well. And there's one other person who is going to make a cameo appearance. Someone who's very well known to you, a very talented, in my view, actor. I'm not going to tell you.
It's going to be
I'm
surprise.
not going to tell you who that is.
You'll have to wait and see.
All right, so we'll begin our reading. This is from chapter 4 of the novel. Pete woke up late the next morning. Susan had left a note on the table. Out with some friends, there was a pot of coffee on the stove, and Anthony Marinelli had called. Pete decided as he got dressed that he really liked this world he now was in. It seemed to have everything that he had liked and loved in his original world. Plus, Stu Sutcliffe was alive and well and playing with the Beatles, who were just bursting with energy. Nothing wrong with that, for sure. But Pete still needed to find out and understand what was going on with those tunnels. He was beginning to play with the idea of just living his life in this world and never going back into those tunnels under Fordham University again. Anthony was a young filmmaker from New Jersey. He made a short movie about Marshall McLuhan, whom Pete had met as a student when McLuhan had been in residence at Fordham in the 1960s. Anthony had also consulted Pete about getting some music that sounded like the Beach Boys for another short documentary Anthony had been making. Pete sipped some coffee and returned the call.
Thanks for getting back to me, Pete. I need your consultation on another movie I'm putting together.
Happy to oblige.
It's a short film, science fiction.
when are you going to make a feature-length film already? Pete said that in the tone that an Italian or Jewish mother would use to chide her son.
I'm working my way up to it.
Don't tell me you knew films about alternate realities. Pete was tempted to say, but he controlled himself and just chuckled.
I know this is last minute, but any chance you're free for lunch today?
WFUV was doing some kind of fundraising special all day. Pete looked at the clock, which meant he was free until the evening when all the DJs would be doing a special show together. Metro Diner worked for you around 1 p.m. The Metro Diner on 100th Street and Broadway was one of Pete's favorite places for lunch. That and the City Diner at Block South. He alternated between them. He was sure the owners of the diners wouldn't be glad to hear this, but Pete thought there wasn't much difference between the two diners. Anthony was already at a table when Pete arrived and waved him over. Pete noticed the crack in the red upholstery before he sat down. For some reason, he actually liked them. It was one of these diners' charms, maybe because it reminded Pete of the old cracked upholstery on the IRT train, which were Pete's only kind of transportation when he was a kid. The waiter came over. Pete ordered sunny-side-up eggs and whole wheat toast and tomatoes instead of potatoes, and an orange juice and a coffee. Anthony ordered a grilled cheese sandwich. He was already nursing a coffee with almost as much milk in it as coffee. So, you're making a science fiction movie?
Yeah, it's about the Beatles. I have this idea. What would have happened if one of them had gotten very sick, even died early in their career? I mean, Ringo was sickly as a boy. He could have contracted something on one of the early tours, which would have been exhausting, right? What would they have done? Recruited Dave Clark, Charlie Watts? I don't know, you're the expert. This would be an alternate history, you know, like Bring the Jubilee or The Man in High Castle. Have you read any of those?
Pete shook his head and clutched the water the waiter had brought when he'd taken their order, because Pete needed to clutch onto something. The icy glass in his hand felt colder than usual. He removed his hand and stared at the imprint of his fingers on the frost. Pete realized he was still shaking his head, but not because he hadn't read the books, which he hadn't. No, he'd read The Man in the High Castle when he was a student at Fordham, and he loved it. He hadn't read or even heard of the Jubilee book, but Pete was shaking his head because he couldn't believe what Anthony Marinelli was saying to him.
You okay?
The waiter appeared as if on cue. Pete looked at his plate. The fork was about halfway down to his egg when Pete made his decision. A piece of the egg white was in his mouth when he looked back up and across the table at Anthony, and Pete began to tell Anthony his whole story. Everything he had told Al, plus what had happened between then and now. The waiter was back with an offer to refill the coffee, which Pete and Anthony gladly accepted.
I don't know what to say. That story is even more incredible than the one I had in mind for this movie.
It's not a story. It's true. The stories, every word, every single word is true.
And you don't want to try the tunnels under Fordham again because...
I like this world I'm now in, and if I go through the tunnels again, how do I know I won't wind up someplace worse? He finished Anthony's question about the tunnels, which Pete had focused on in his recounting. Anthony sipped his coffee.
I like your story better than mine.
I just told you.
I know. I'm riffing, speculating, but what would be the harm if I made a movie about that? I mean, I give you all the writing credit, of course, the whole thing. It's your story. It's your true story.
Pete held up his hand. Anthony held up his hand to fend off what he knew would be Pete's objection. Pete, of course, did object, but for a different reason. It's too dangerous. Students could swarm the tunnels looking for a better reality. Fordham administration would likely shut them down to make sure that that didn't happen.
But you said you didn't want to go back into them.
So right. But that's now. I could always change my mind. He said goodbye to Anthony, thanked him for the lunch, and told him he'd think about his filmmaking proposal. The day was bright and cool, perfect for a slow walk down Broadway and over to the train up to Fordham. Or he could make a stop along the way in Washington Heights. The comfort of Coogan's appealed to him. A cold beer or two would really go down well today. He could hop on a train and be there in no. Pete needed a clear head today. Again. He had a feeling he was going to need a clear head every day from now on. Pete passed the city diner on 90th Street and realized he hadn't really meant to tell Anthony he would think about his proposal. In fact, Pete had no intention of working with Anthony on a film of the insanity he'd been living since that trip down to the city on a train that was still somehow called Conrail when he boarded it. So why then had he given Anthony, just given Anthony, that big ray of hope? Pete had no idea. It had just burst out of him. As he continued making his way south on this sunny day, Pete began to realize why he had given Anthony that response. Pete was no psychologist, but he knew enough of Freud to know that his unconscious, anyone's unconscious, had a mind of its own, so to speak. Pete had said that to Anthony because Pete wanted so desperately to find out what was going on, and Anthony maybe could be a good ally. Having found himself in this world that defied all logic, Pete knew he needed all the help he could get. This realization energized Pete. He quickened his pace. He replayed every part of his conversation with Anthony in the diner. He kept coming back to one question Anthony had asked him.
Are you 100% sure the tunnels under Fordham are the conduit of these alternate realities?
What else could it be? Peter replied, and he told Anthony that hearing Dennis Ellis talk about McCartney's musical, written with Isaac Asimov after Pete had returned to Fordham, after his first experience in an alternate reality, the terrible one in which John Lennon had been killed. That was the first Pete had heard about such a musical. And Peter told Anthony how relieved he'd been to find that Lennon was still alive and well in this reality, which had the big bonus of Stu Sutcliffe also alive and still with the Beatles. And Peter told Anthony that all of that had happened after Pete had made the return trip through the tunnels. But as Pete finally approached the northern entrance to what was now once again called the Metro North System on West 48th Street, he began to wonder, could his ride on this train into and then out of Manhattan on that day also have been the ride Pete had taken into and out of the back, then again into these alternate realities? Pete wanted an understanding. He thought back again to his conversation with Anthony and the man in the White House. Roosevelt had been assassinated. There was a reason for that alternate reality. And because FDR had been assassinated, the U.S. did mount as strong an opposition to the Nazis as had been done in the reality that Pete had been living in. But the problem with the insanity Pete was now living in, however fascinating it might be with Stu Sutcliffe alive, is that Pete could think of no reason that it had happened, other than his walk through the tunnels, or maybe the commuter rail, whatever its name. But those were very different kinds of reasons than the U.S. president being assassinated in the 1930s. Pete needed more information. His train had just emerged from its tunnel and was now on its elevated track. It had seemed to rattle and clack more than ever, maybe in sync with the way his brain had been all dirt. The air over the city had its customary summer haze. But Pete was suddenly seeing more clearly. He took out his phone and called Anthony.
Pete, what's up?
I'll help you with the movie. This is from chapter 9. But this day wasn't done with Pete yet. He'd taken about 10 steps outside of keying when his phone rang. Anthony, how you doing?
I think I've got someone who can play Suzanne. Would you like to meet her?
Sure. But Pete felt like he had gone way over his daily supply of learning new things, which was usually pretty high. He told Anthony about Suzanne when he had let Anthony know that Pete was on board with Anthony making a movie about Pete's journey down this insane rabbit hole. Suzanne was almost daily becoming a more important actor in this bizarre, incredible story Pete was living, and he was eager to see who Anthony had in mind to play her.
Metro Diner?
Yeah, I can be there in 45 minutes. Pete quickened his pace, walked out of the campus gate, past the Metro North Station, and up the hill towards the D train station. He suppressed the impulse he always had to walk into Alexander's department store, down to the basement of that great record collection. He instead hurried down the stairs to catch the subway train. Anthony, and presumably the woman he said could play Suzanne in the movie he wanted to make about Pete's situation, were already at a table when Pete entered the Metro Diner. First thing Pete thought as Anthony rose and welcomed him to the table was the woman, the really attractive, looked absolutely nothing like Suzanne.
I know. Amanda doesn't look like what you told me Suzanne looks like, but no one other than Leonard Cohen knows what Suzanne looks like, so what does it matter?
Fair point. Pete smiled at Amanda as he took a seat. It was at a different table than the one he'd been sitting at the last time he'd been here, but the red upholstery was cracked anyway. What did this Metro Diner do? Order the upholstery delivered that way? What, did they get some kind of discount when they ordered their red upholstery cracked? Pete realized he'd been chuckling.
Amanda Greer, this is Pete Fornatello.
Hi.
Hello.
Good to meet you.
Amanda played Marilyn Monroe in a little movie I did last year. She played her ghost.
Marilyn Monroe had blonde hair. Your hair is beautiful, Amanda, but
It's black. I know. Darling, that's what wigs are for.
good point. Okay, also fair point. Okay, I'll admit to knowing next to nothing when it comes to making movies, but look, here's another problem. I have no idea how all of this, what I've been going through, what I'm trying to do, what you're now getting involved in, how all of this is going to end. So, how are you going to write your script?
I'll wait until you tell me how this all ends, and then I'll write the end of the screenplay.
Right, if I'm here in this world to tell you how this all ends, Pete thought morbidly. Then he realized he didn't have to be dead to no longer be in this world. He could be in an alternate reality. And the thing of that was, he couldn't be sure that that would be a better alternative. The waiter came by to take Pete's order. He couldn't bear to drink another cup of coffee. Do you by any chance have a vanilla egg cream? The last time Pete had one of those had been in a luncheonette on Fordham Road when he'd been a student at the university in the 1960s.
Waiter, do you have any? Do you have any egg?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
One line.
I skipped that on the rehearsal. I missed my cue.
I still think he has to make it to
I'll have one of those.
Okay. I'll have one of those, thank you. Pete turned back to Anthony. You know, you may be more optimistic than I am, but I'll be around to tell you how all this ends.
You mean,
I think there's a chance that I might wind up in yet another alternate reality.
that could be a great ending.
Yeah, but if that happens, that would mean I wouldn't be around here to tell you, even tell you what reality I was in, what I was doing there, and you'd have no way of knowing if I lived or survived.
If that were the case, I could end this movie with a lady or the tiger ambiguous ending.
Fabulous.
Pete racked his memory. Okay, he read the short story in an English class at Fordham Prep on the same campus as the university. An ending where you don't know whether the hero lives or dies. I see you share my high stakes view of this.
Yeah, and I think I read that story a long time ago, but I'm a little hazy on the details. So.
Anthony summarized The Lady or the Tiger, the classic 1982 story by Frank R. Stockton.
And as long as we're doing summaries, could you update us on where you are with your own story right now? It would really help Amanda begin to get a sense of the person she'd be playing. I already told her about the meeting you had with Suzanne and Alexander and Corky's.
Pete's ad cream arrived. You can stay with you.
How's that Adrian?
Sounds good. He took a sip, then another sip, then closed his eyes. It was sweet and good. And it put Pete in a slightly better mood. All right. And he told Anthony and Amanda most of what had happened in the conversation he and Al had with Suzanne earlier today. Not that he deliberately left anything out, but so much has happened. I just can't guarantee that I've told you every single detail.
Well, what you told us is more than enough to get started.
Yeah, and Suzanne sounds fascinating, an incredible woman, and I'd really love to meet her.
You'll be just another person pretending to be Suzanne if you get this role, an uncharitable part of Pete's thought. No, he now believed his Suzanne was Leonard Cohen's in at least some of these realities. Or at any rate, he had to believe that. No, he did believe it. I think we can make that happen. I told Suzanne about Anthony's desire to make a movie about all this, and she thought that was a good idea.
Well, excellent. I usually say there's no rush, but I'm so excited about this movie and so glad that Amanda wants to be a part of it. I'd say the sooner the better.
Yay! All right!
Pete rose and thanked Anthony for the air cream. Really good to meet you. I'll be back to Anthony about Suzanne. So,
Fabulous, Doug.
all right, this is from chapter 11, and just to tell you what's going on, I'm going to just begin reading the very first part, and then we're going to be turning the reading over pretty soon to Denise, who's going to be doing the narration. Right, Pete, actually Suzanne starts. Denise starts the narration. Go ahead.
Yeah. Pete went to Fordham early the next day and dropped by Al's office.
Suzanne and I went into the alternate reality yesterday, the one in which John Lennon was murdered.
Al put down the stack of papers he had been reading and grading.
Not a great answer.
Hi. Why did you tell me? You know I would have loved to come along.
Look, it was a spur of the moment decision.
You walked the tunnels?
No, she uses a different method, and she hasn't given me clearance yet to tell anyone where it is. It might not work for anyone other than Suzanne. Anyway, you have to be holding on to her.
Holding on to her?
Right. If she was holding a package, that would go into the alternate reality along with her. Works the same if she's holding someone's hand. At least that's how she explained it to me.
So what did you learn?
I read the newspapers on microfiche that copiously described how John Lennon was killed. He was a sitting duck back there at the Dakota in 1980.
He and Yoko and Sean's girlfriend still live there, if I'm not mistaken.
I know.
Any chance we can get them to move?
I doubt it. You saw how Lennon and Bowie reacted to what we were saying to them at Japanica. Lennon would have to believe that there are alternate realities to seriously consider any plea for him to move.
Okay, so you invite Lennon to take a walk with Suzanne at the appropriate place and show him the alternate reality in which he was killed. Would he believe that? He'd have to hold Suzanne's hand. You think he's a type?
My wife would say John Lennon is every woman's type.
Sorry, I know this is no joking matter.
That's all right. We need to do whatever we can ourselves to stay sane in this reality.
Thanks. And actually, I just had an idea.
Yeah?
Didn't you tell me the other day some guy wants to make a movie about your alternate reality experiences?
That's right, Anthony Marinelli.
Okay, so here's my bright idea, Mr. Movie Star. You take Anthony along with a camera on his shoulder next time you and Suzanne take a walk into that horrible alternate reality. Anthony films some of those microfiche headlines you saw. You come back to this reality and then you show the film to Lennon, and that should convince him.
I don't know if Suzanne would agree to that.
She has two hands, doesn't she? She could hold your hand in one and Anthony's in the other. Hey, that could be a pretty good scene in the movie, right?
Pete still wasn't entirely convinced.
Okay. As a backup, you could take a video camera with you yourself. They're much lighter and easier to carry these days. Or even some still photographs of those headlines could work with Lennon.
You'd think they were faked. Like the photograph of Lincoln with Lincoln's head on John Calhoun's body. No, the video or motion picture would be much more convincing, at least to me, if I were the one who needed convincing. And that should work the same for Lennon.
All right, well, at least think about it.
I will. And hey, thanks for the suggestion. I just have to figure out the best way to make it work.
Pete thought about it more and more as he walked up the stairs to WFUV. He had to be honest with himself. He'd never used a video camera. Probably wasn't too difficult to learn how to use it, but he couldn't take the chance of getting Suzanne to take him back to that reality, video record those December 1980 headlines, only to find they hadn't really been recorded or recorded clearly enough to convince John Lennon when Pete returned to this reality. But Anthony Marinelli was a pro. He knew what he was doing with the camera. He no doubt would love to do this, if only to meet Suzanne. The question was whether Suzanne would go along with it. There's only one way to find out. This is from chapter 12. Pete woke up about 3 minutes from his stop, his sixth sense kicking in again. He realized he'd been dreaming, but he couldn't remember the dream. He walked home on automatic, barely aware of his surroundings, deep in thought. There was a note on the table from Susan that she'd be home in an hour. That gave him a bit more time to keep thinking about what he wanted to do tomorrow. But he made up his mind, and after a few minutes, he called Anthony.
Pete, how you doing?
Actually, more clear about what I want to do than I've been since all of this started. How would you like to take a walk with me in that tunnel under Fordham University tomorrow?
You mean that tunnel that took you into an alternate reality? I thought you wanted to avoid that like the plague. You hated the reality that tunnel brought you to, right?
Right, but going through that tunnel could maybe give me a way of making sure John Lennon isn't killed in the reality we're living in right now. I'd like you to film some of the newspaper headlines from that 1980 horrible alternate reality. They're on microfiche in the library. They talk about John Lennon's assassination. I'll show them to John in our current reality once you and I get back here. And maybe then he'll take protecting himself more seriously, like moving out of the place in which he was killed in the other reality, in case some maniac analog of a killer shows up with a gun in this one.
I see you've given this a lot of thought.
I've been doing nothing but thinking about this. It seems now like forever.
Yeah.
So, can you do it? I'd like to do this right after my show, late this afternoon. The more I think about it, the sooner the better. I want to get the film with the microfiche of those headlines to John Lennon as soon as possible.
Didn't you tell me you couldn't be sure what reality the tunnel under Fordham would shut you into?
Look, we can't be sure of anything in this. This is the best shot we have at this moment.
He didn't need to tell Anthony that Suzanne had disappeared. Anthony was silent. He finally spoke.
Look, I'll tell you the truth, Pete. I still don't know if I believe you about these alternate realities. But whether these alternate realities you say you've been to are real or not, your story will make a really great movie. I'm sure of that. At the same time, if they are real, I don't want to get stranded in some alternate reality and end up in some hellhole even worse than the one you visited. You don't know for sure that walking back in the tunnel will always get you back to the reality from which you started, right?
No, I don't.
He was beyond getting angry, and it would serve no point anyway.
I mean, my wife, sitting right there, would never forgive me if I didn't come back.
Look, you'd be crazy not to think that.
He knew all too well that he still hadn't told his own wife anything about this.
But yes, okay, you only live once. I'll do this with you anyway. What time do you need me there?
Pete got to the radio station early again. His colleagues would get the wrong impression of him, that he'd suddenly turn over a new leaf and become punctual. He hadn't bothered to stop on Al's floor. He knew Al had no classes today. He was just about to call Al and fill him in on the big plan when his phone rang. It was Anthony.
You're not going to believe this. I'm on the side of the turnpike out here in New Jersey. My Yugo just died. I'll be stuck here for hours. Piece of shit car.
Pete had no words.
But I just spoke to Amanda. She can do this with you.
But
She has a video camera and she's very good with it. She's done some work with it on my movies. A mix of film and video gives a good cinema verite effect. She's at both sides of the camera girl.
okay.
And what choice did he have?
I mean, this really kills me, Pete. I was really psyched to do this with you. But she'll come through with you. She knows what she's doing. Trust me.
All right. Thanks for getting a replacement so quickly. I'll call you as soon as we get back to this reality so you'll know we're not stranded somewhere in the other one.
Pete called Fordham Security and told them Amanda Greer, not Anthony Marinelli, would be coming to see him. He went through his show on autopilot, barely able to think and talk about what he was playing. Amanda showed up with a big smile and her video camera as the last song finished and segued into PSAs.
Thanks so much for letting me do this, and I'm really grateful, and I'm just so excited.
Listen, thanks for stepping up. Is there anything you'd like to know about what we'll be doing?
I don't think so. I mean, Anthony filled me in pretty thoroughly, but if it's okay, I would like to test the camera here, just to make sure everything is working as it should be. Videos, of course, can be around for a while, but these little cameras, they work great, but, they're pretty new.
All right. Have you had any problems with it?
No, none at all. It's just my policy, right? Double check, make sure we're good.
That's a good policy.
Okay, can we do it right here in the studio?
Sure.
Perfect.
Dennis Elsas had already arrived to do the next show, but he told Pete he needed to check with someone about teaching a course in the communications department, so he'd be starting the first 10 minutes of the show with recording.
We have this room for at least a few minutes.
Oh, that's all I need. Okay.
So Amanda began unpacking her video. She had the camera on her shoulder, her head behind it, a minute later.
Okay, let's just start talking. All right. What's the most exciting thing that's happened to you in the past few weeks? I know, a dumb question to ask you, but just for the recording.
Right. Let's see. That would have been having lunch in Japanica, a great Japanese restaurant in the city, and talking to John Lennon and David Bowie sitting right at my table.
That must have been really exciting. Is that the most exciting thing that they told you, or?
It was probably their interest in science fiction that really fascinated me. It's always very satisfying to meet kindred fans, especially when they're the most famous people in the world. And the food was super.
Oh, perfect. We could sell this as a commercial to Japanica.
Amanda laughed and turned off the camera.
Let me see what we have here.
She motioned Pete to join her and look at the recording. Pete got up and joined Amanda behind the camera. She pressed playback. Pete saw himself on the screen. His customary blue dress shirt looked a little more faded than he'd realized. Amanda's voice came on.
See what we have here. Let me see. See, this is why I double check.
Thing that's happened to you in the past few weeks. I know, a dumb question to ask you, but
Okay. Wow. Perfect.
Perfect's the right word for this. I was really impressed with that. Great job.
Thanks.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
Amanda started packing up her video.
Oh, there's one other thing. you'll need to hold my hand as we walk through the tunnel, to make sure we both get through to the alternate reality.
He and Al had walked through the tunnel from one reality to another without holding hands. But he wanted to go belt and suspenders on this one and do everything he could to make sure Amanda made it with him to the alternate reality and its death of Lennon she'd record in those headlines.
It's fine by me.
Pete stood ready to join her at the door when the phone rang. You still there?
Just another second.
It's Tom Petty on the phone for you. He really loves your show. Can I put him through?
Sure.
Pete tried not to make any kind of face that Amanda could see.
I just want to thank you again for playing one of our songs.
Well, Free Fallin' is a great song, and it felt very appropriate, honestly, for the way I feel today. You and the Heartbreakers make catchy music.
Hey, thanks again, man.
You got it.
He put the phone back on its cradle.
Was that Tom Petty?
Yes.
I love Tom Petty.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
The two left the radio station. And now this is chapter 13. Pete had a good feeling about this as he and Amanda walked down the stairs and then beneath the ground floor of Keating Hall. Amanda was going to play Suzanne in the movie Pete was more and more comfortable about Marinelli making, and here Amanda was, in effect, standing in for Suzanne in yet another insane sojourn into an alternate reality. Insane? Yes, but also absolutely necessary, as Pete now believed with all of his heart and soul. Of course, what Anthony Marinelli had to say to Pete on the phone this morning wasn't wrong, even more so than Marinelli could know. Suzanne had made it clear almost from the beginning that she could select the alternate reality she went into, in contrast to Pete, who had no choice in his first, and until today, only trip without Suzanne to this alternate reality, where Pete fervently hoped this tunnel they would soon be walking in would take Amanda and him in a few minutes. It had occurred to Pete that perhaps this tunnel had taken him to that world in which John Lennon had been killed because Pete had some kind of special connection to that world, some role he was destined to play in it. Pete had been getting goosebumps for years, it seemed, whenever he played the record in which he could hear Lennon's voice, and even more so when he began playing Real Life on WNEW in 1985. Maybe that was because that other world was calling out to him, beseeching him to do something to correct the unspeakable wrong that had been done there. As he opened the door to the tunnel in the basement and took Amanda's hand, Pete thought, well, he and Amanda would very soon find out a lot more about this, one way or another. Pete's good feeling continued as he and Amanda walked back up from the tunnels onto the campus via Theobald Hall. Pete pointed to Duane Library.
Let's first check out the encyclopedias to make sure they're in the right place. And if that checks out, you'll video record the microfiche.
Amanda nodded, and the two walked to the library and then its encyclopedia section. Pete found the Britannica volumes, bent down to look closer, and shook his head in dismay.
Jeez, the relevant volume is missing.
Well, let's try the World Book.
Pete was glad to hear her calm voice. He moved quickly to that shelf and shook his head again.
Same.
He thought, was someone in this reality trying to get in the way of him doing this now? But who here would know he was doing this? And how? Amanda started to say something, but two students come over, each with a stack of encyclopedia volumes.
Sorry. We're doing a paper on Belgium in the Second World War, and it was due yesterday.
Pete smiled at them.
It's okay.
Pete smiled at Amanda as the students finished putting back up the volumes.
It's no problem, dears.
Amanda smiled back, and the students smiled too. Great, everyone is smiling, Pete thought anxiously. But let's get our eyes on the volume with the Beatles already. The students walked away after apologizing again. Pete looked at the page with the entry on the Beatles and was once again relieved and upset that it was exactly the same page he was reading now for the third time with the news of Lennon's death in 1980. He nodded, sighed with relief, and looked up at Amanda.
We made it to the right place. Let's get the microfiche.
It took about 20 long minutes before the microfiche they had recorded up was on the screen in front of them. They both took in the sickening headline. Pete indeed felt a combination of elation and keen distress once again, and Amanda looked like she felt the same way. She quickly unpacked her video, and the security guard walked up to them on little cat speed.
Not allowed to do that here.
I know. We're doing an important documentary for WFUV, and I promise you, we won't be here for more than a minute.
Hey, you're Pete Fornatale. I saw you on that PBS special last year.
Yeah.
You know, my daughter loves your show, and the Beatles too. I tell you what, I'll let you do this, but just for a minute. If you play a special request for her tomorrow on your show, it's her birthday.
Hey, it would be my pleasure, and thank you. What's a request?
Pete, of course, was aware that he had no control over what his analog in this reality played on tomorrow's or any day's show, or even if his analog would be on the air here tomorrow. And he really felt bad about making a commitment to this guy that Pete knew he personally couldn't keep, but he had no choice.
Well, since her name is Michelle, I guess you can guess what her request would be.
I'll get it played tomorrow. How old is she?
And he realized a moment too late that the guard's answer could make him feel even worse.
She'll be 8 years old. Sweetest little girl in the world.
He did feel worse.
Well, wish her a happy birthday for me, and I'll be sure to tell her myself on tomorrow's show.
Thanks again, Pete.
The guard beamed and walked away.
This alternate reality stuff has made a liar out of me more times than I can remember. I have no way of letting my alternate reality self or anyone else in this reality know I made this commitment.
I mean, does he even exist here with you here now? I mean, can the two of you co-exist the same?
I don't think so. Back in your and Anthony's reality, which has become my reality, I haven't seen any sign of the Pete who originally was there. But who knows? I don't know. I don't even know if Pete Fornatale has a mixed bag show or any show on WFUV here in this wretched reality.
He looked up at the awful screen and cursed to himself.
But wait. The security guard knew about my show. That means there's 100% analog of me who does a radio show on WFUV. Is that right? Go ahead and record that screen and let's get the hell out of here.
I already did.
Amanda was slightly embarrassed, but mostly proud.
You know, when you and the guard were talking, I played it back. It's recorded perfectly.
The two made their way out of the library and back to the boat hall.
I have an idea.
Yeah.
Maybe before we re-enter the tunnels, we could walk back to Keating, still in this reality, and I could leave the WFUV receptionist a note to play the Beatles' Michelle tomorrow for that little girl.
Isn't that dangerous? I mean, let's say you bump into someone your alter self knows and she or he starts talking to you. You might have no idea what they're talking about.
Good point.
Okay.
The two approached the bog. As they entered the hall, a student was leaving.
Excuse me. I know this is out of the clear blue sky, but if I quickly write you a note, could you leave it for the receptionist at WFUV Radio?
I can't believe it, Pete Fornatale. I shook hands with you at an FUV fundraiser a couple of years ago. They had just about everyone who had ever been on the air at the station past and present there. I was just a freshman then. I was too shy to introduce myself and actually talk to you. Man, I wanted to be a DJ too.
But what, you changed your mind? Well, what happened?
Well, yeah, my parents are pressuring me to finish up here and then go for an MBA. That's where they say the money is.
Ah, yes. They may be right, but look, don't let them talk you out of doing what you really love. Anyway, I'm already late for another gig now, and I really need to get this note to the station. Their voicemail isn't working.
Yeah, tell me about it. Kludgy system, but I'm sure I can get that note up there for you.
Amanda had already removed a pad of paper and a pen from her video bag. She gave them to Pete, who wrote a note in the clearest handwriting he could summon to play Michelle tomorrow and dedicate it to Michelle on her 8th birthday. He signed it. He was hoping his alter self, as Amanda had aptly called him, had the same handwriting and would recognize it as his own, even if he had no recollection of writing it. The student took the note and nodded.
I'll do this right now.
Hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And remember, always follow your bliss.
The student nodded again, turned, and quickly walked away.
You're quite the star here. You think your ultra self will play that song and make that dedication?
The two walked into the bog.
You know, that's a complex question. Before all of this started, if I'd received a request in my handwriting, signed by me, that I hadn't written, I think it was some kind of forgery or scam. But you know what? I'm going with hoping he'll believe he had too much to drink the other night and his memory was spotty.
Did you ever drink that much?
I used to. And who knows what my alter self does now, but you know, booze certainly wouldn't be alien to him as far as I'm concerned.
Good.
I don't know. Maybe Michelle has a better chance of being played here if someone else at the station receives that note. And damn it, I didn't get that kid's name. I'd like to check him out back in our reality and find out if he does actually go on
Well,
to become a great teacher.
don't tell me you want to go back over there.
No, you're right. You're right.
The two proceeded down the stairs to the tunnel.
All right.
Amanda took Pete's hand as the two entered the tunnel.
I don't know where the transition actually occurs in this tunnel, so you need to hold my hand the whole way. I hope that's okay. Like the way we walk here and we enter the tunnel here.
I know.
The two walked quickly, hand in hand, video pack on Amanda's shoulder. He was looking forward to calling Lennon's publicist to set up a meeting with John as soon as they got out of the tunnel on the other side and confirmed that they had made it back to the right reality. They got to the basement of Keating and climbed the stairs to the ground floor. Pete took Amanda in the direction of Keating first to auditorium. He wanted to look into the auditorium and say a silent thanks to Bellarmine.
So next step is we go to the library here and make sure we came back to reality from which we started.
Right.
They forgot to stop holding hands until they approached Duane Library. They made their way to the encyclopedia section. He was glad to see all the volumes were there. He pulled out the usual volume and opened it to the Beatles. He looked up at Amanda with joy in his eyes.
All's well. We got back to the right place.
He would have hugged her right then and there if they hadn't been in the library. Amanda began unpacking her video.
Let's look at the recording.
Pete put the encyclopedia volume back on the shelf and rose.
Wait. Let's do that outside. I don't want to have to bribe another security guard with a special airplay request.
The two hustled outside and sat on the old stone bench in front of the library.
Does the battery have enough power to work?
Oh, yeah. I can get an hour's use from it, and both the test recording in your studio and the real recording in the alternate reality took just a few minutes at most.
Okay.
Pete raised a celebratory fist to the sky, which proved premature. Pete looked at Amanda. He didn't like the look that increasingly had taken hold on her face.
What's the matter?
Her face was now red with anger and aggravation. She repeatedly pressed a button and started cursing.
What's the...
It's not there.
He moved closer to Amanda so he could see the complete little screen. What he saw was the test they had done back up in his office before they'd taken the tunnel to the alternate reality.
There's no other recording on the tape?
No.
I don't understand. We saw the recording of that headline with our own eyes back in alternate Duane Library.
We did.
And Pete then did understand.
That recording in that alternate reality didn't survive our walk in the tunnel back to this reality.
Why not?
I don't know. I don't know. Some kind of intrinsic protective mechanisms so alternate realities don't bleed into one another.
Amanda nodded, then cursed again, loudly.
And that's now getting in the way of our stopping John Lennon from being shot and bleeding to death.
I should have checked in the alternate reality to see if the test recording came through the transition, and I was just so pumped, and I just went to the recording and the headline, and
We wouldn't have done anything different even if you had done that, and we saw that the test recording didn't make it.
He tried to console her. He needed plenty of consolation himself.
But now we don't know if the test recording was erased when we entered the alternate reality and then it came back when we re-entered this one, or if it even survived the transitions.
I know. It doesn't matter.
And Pete thought that gut-punching headline hadn't survived their walk in the tunnels back to this reality, but would it survive in his head for as long as he had lived?
Now I'm going to resume the narration. Pete had a depressing lunch with Anthony, who said there was no point in even starting to make a movie until they knew how it ended. Amanda was also at the table, and Pete could see how aggravated she still was. Well, wait a minute, what about the lady with the tiger? He'd asked, even though he was by no means sure that he wanted to go forward with the movie at this point either.
And the genius of that ambiguous ending was an answer to a very clear either-or question. Does the princess send her lover to his death, or does she save him? Your story as it now stands is the antithesis of clear. It's not your fault in any way, believe me, but I think we need more substance before we can do this movie. Also, it doesn't help that Suzanne is unavailable.
Pete had earlier told him that Suzanne had apparently left town. He didn't want Anthony to think Pete was evading Anthony's request for him and Amanda to meet.
I'll be here for you. And whenever you think you can proceed with this project, it's just the most exciting thing I've ever worked on. I mean, no, I'm very excited to work on everything with you too.
But this play was a little better.
Okay, yeah. Well, I agree with you about this project. It is the most exciting thing
Right.
I've worked on. We just need to get it right.
And that's,
The end.
thank you.
Save the Beatles!
Fully, we're open for questions.
Yes,
Anyone-
absolutely.
People have any questions?
Well, Frank, why don't you start?
Well, how did all you guys come together? I mean, you all just their careers and stuff. How
We're
did you
kind of
come
attached
together?
at the hip. They're a package deal.
Well, no, I'll tell you, Lou. I first met Anthony, and again, I tried to put into the novel as much truth, actual things that happened to me as I could, because to me, these those seem the most believable. So, the way Anthony and I first met is in the early 2000s. One day, I think I get an email from Anthony in which he says, "Hey, I'm working on a play called Acoustic Space." And as Anthony correctly said, this, of course, is a term that Marshall McLuhan came up with to make the point that, you know, when you hear something, it can come from any place in the environment. It's like a 360-degree surround. When you look at something, though, all you see is what you're looking at. And McLuhan's point is, because of electronic media, everything we see is actually in acoustic space form, because there are televisions, radios everywhere, and we get it in a 360-degree surround. So I don't know if I said that much to Anthony in that conversation, but I probably, or in the email, I probably said, "Sure, happy to read over your play." I did. I thought Anthony got the concept of acoustic space right, and we've been in touch for a while. And then I'll turn this over to Anthony to tell you how he came to know about his incredibly important role.
And Acoustic Space ended up performing in New York City on the stage and then screened at the Cannes Film Festival. So.
Incredible film.
Yeah.
Very
Very
good
good
film and won a few awards. But with Paul, I wrote the play and I read his book, Digital McLuhan, and I said, well, if I want to make sure that everything I'm saying is correct, the source is right here. I'm going to see if I can get in touch with him and see if I can make sure that I'm doing it right and saying the right thing. And so that's how that came about.
What year was that?
That was 2002. Wow. Yeah. So with this, Paul contacted me and said he had written this novel, and he included myself and Amanda as characters. And would that be okay? I said, "What? Wait, that's like the most amazing thing ever. You want me as a character in your book? That's great. Of course, yes." What about Amanda? Knowing Amanda as I do, we've known each other for years, we've been working together for a long time. I'm sure she would say yes, and of course she did.
I came across that email recently where you said, by the way, we're in a book. Yeah, and I'm also in Anthony's book. He's also a published author too. And you can see it right here, Simple Things. That's me right there. Just a little thinner before the pandemic. Yeah.
So they have been doing rehearsals for this, and I was coming as a guest. I was originally going to come as a guest, and then one of them suggested, well, why don't we have Denise? Amanda suggested, why don't we have Denise come in and join us and read some stuff? And Paul invited me, hey, would you like to come be a part of it? I said, yeah, absolutely. He goes, you got 2 lines. And I said, sorry, what? 2? And then so graciously said I could read some narration. And it sounds good.
Her voice ended up sounding like butter, right?
Like butter.
Like butter.
Like butter.
And then I already told you about Frank.
That was the hired muscle. See all the video equipment.
Yeah.
But, we were really desperate. And we needed somebody.
And he was always yeah.
Well,
No.
we needed somebody who could read all of these diverse parts with at least a modicum of style. And so I knew that Frank.
He's a very versatile man. Give it up for Frank.
People might actually like me. Wouldn't want that to happen.
Well, he's had a few acting classes.
So I have to say though, of all the readings I've done, in the science fiction area or any area, over my long number of years, this is by far the most exciting and satisfying reading.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Any questions for Paul about how he came up with the thing, or the concept, or anybody wanna?
Don't be shy.
Ask a question.
Ask your question, Matt.
What is your relationship personally with the Beatles?
My relationship? Well, first of all, given my age, I was 16 years old when he was first hit, and that was like, the perfect age. And not only that, I had my own folk rock group. We would actually sing in Polk Park and places in the Bronx. I grew up in the Bronx. And, I wasn't the only one who loved the Beatles, but I had like a special feeling for them because of that music. And in fact, my very first published article is called A Vote for McCarthy. And the way McCartney,
We knew what you meant.
the way that came to be, there used to be a critic, he's still alive, but I don't mind heaping some more abuse on him, even though he's no longer writing for the Village Voice. He was a critic for the Village Voice. His name is Robert Christgau, and he had a way, at least in my view, of saying the wrong thing about the most important artists. So I never understood why he got to that position and kept it. For example, here's what Christgau said about Phil Oakes, the folk singer, after he heard an album. It sounds like he's playing a guitar as if a duck were trying to play a guitar with its feet or something. Some insane thing.
Very specific.
As if it matters how Phil Oakes plays a guitar. Nothing about his lyrics, nothing about his wonderful voice. So I probably came across that and I was already annoyed at him. And then I read his review of McCartney's second album after the Beatles broke up. So I wrote an angry letter to the Village Voice, and in Christgau's review he said, there's some kind of mismatch between style and form. I didn't understand what the hell he was trying to say in the album, but I was able to come up with the line, the only mismatch in this whole thing must be in the stereo components that Christgau is listening to. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So Christgau got really angry at me, by the way. But much to my amazement, it's just a letter. Like 2 weeks later, I find in my mailbox something from the Village Voice. And I open it up, there's a letter, but what I look at first is a check for $65.
Low
I said,
landing
right? This is a good way to earn money.
Yes.
I felt great writing the article. I was hoping it would have to be for a scout. I'm sure it did. I'm getting paid for it. Yeah. So that was, so, and over the years, I followed the Beatles very carefully, and as I've, said many times, people my age, we've had the misfortune of living through some horrendous assassinations. John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy. I mean, the 1960s were a horror show when it came to that. And actually the music, and especially the Beatles, are one of the things that got us through that. So, when John Lennon was assassinated, not that I was in any way okay with the other assassinations, because I'll probably never get over John F. Kennedy being assassinated. I could feel the world turn for the worse the moment that I heard that news. But there was always something about John Lennon's assassination that seemed really even wronger than just assassinations. He wasn't in politics, he was making wonderful music.
Yeah.
And, I could talk to you for an hour about this insane world where everyone, carries guns for no reason at all. People in the rest of the world think we're crazy. And I agree with them. about that. So I was really upset about that, and but of course there was nothing I could do about that. But as I later became a science fiction writer, I began increasingly thinking, well, there is something I can do about it. Yes.
Is this the first time you've written about alternate reality? Or have you written about it in some of your other...
Yes, that's a great question. It's the first work I have that's totally alternate reality. But as some of you might know who read science fiction, alternate reality is closely related to time travel, because if you go back in the past and change something, at that moment, the reality changes. So I was always flirting with alternate reality. And in I have like a series of stories called Loose Ends. They're all together in one book called the Loose Ends Saga. At some point, I have one of the time travelers, it's basically a time travel series of stories, wrestle with the fact that if he does this, something good will happen, but he won't be able to save John Lennon. And which is more important, saving John Lennon or this other thing? In fact, I'll tell you what it was. It was basically, he had a choice. If he did this, that the Soviet Union would indeed cease to exist, but John Lennon would die. If he saved John Lennon, the Soviet Union would continue. Of course, back then, when I wrote that, I had no idea that Vladimir Putin would take over Russia and be active, like was the Soviet Union. So that's a great question. So alternate reality has always been like right next door and sometimes mentioned in what I wrote. But this is the first full-fledged alternate reality, and it's very satisfying because you can get at being God. As far as the story in those pages is concerned, you can do anything you want. But I'm not going to tell you how the novel ends. Yes. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I was wondering if you saw the film Yesterday, the Danny Boyle film.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that got me to write it is and some of you, as I'm sure many of you may know, Sirius XM Radio, by starting the Beatles channel, really rekindled a lot of people's interest in the Beatles. I mean, I never lost interest, but that's what really got me thinking about this. And yet, the movie Yesterday, and many other
Across the universe.
Yes, that's right. Last 10 years, but that's really when I started thinking about and writing the story. And then won some awards, and I was happy to expand it into a novel. By the way, most, at least for me as a writer, I once had a professor of philosophy at NYU whose thesis about writing was that everything you do, we think it has like one right size as far as writing is concerned. A short story or an article, a novel or a full-length book. His point was that, in fact, everything that you write can be in any size you want. You just have to work differently at it. I think that, so if any of you have written short stories, and you think it could be maybe a novel, go for it.
The young lady behind you.
In the back.
I was going to ask if you could talk a little bit about research you might have done. I imagine you did to keep historically accurate with details throughout the book.
Imagine.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I also like little details,
Yeah.
like how you talked about rips in the diner seats.
Yeah, thank
You know, stuff like that.
Well, first of all, let me tell you that one of the differences between writing scholarly nonfiction and any kind of novel is you don't need footnotes or bibliography. And so I do find, writing fiction liberating in that sense. And honestly, all the things that I put into the novel were things that actually I experienced or happened to me in one way or another, or I've already thought about. The only research I did was I just had to make sure the years were right and it makes sense. For example, at some point in the novel, I sort of just briefly mentioned Peter Jackson, who in the 1990s is making some kind of science fiction movie. So I did have to look up and make sure that Peter Jackson could have done that in the 1990s. But the idea was my idea. I didn't do research and find that. I had an idea and I was confirming it more. And as far as little details, this is like the arrogance of writing. At least for me, I assume that when I find interesting details, my readers will agree with me. So like the cracks, I've thought about that for a long time. What is wrong with these diners? You look at it, has this, I mean, sure they can get it fixed. I thought that for a long time. So that seemed like a good thing to stick into the novel. It could have, the same scene could have been written without that.
My
That's how
favorite.
Denise and I feel about movie theater seats.
Yeah.
It's like, why are they so uncomfortable? We're
Yeah,
supposed
yeah.
to sit in there for 2 hours.
My favorite detail was that Anthony's coffee had just as much milk as coffee, because that's how I drink mine.
A lot of people do that. Also, it's a slap at diners, because usually their coffee is so god awful.
You can tell how he feels about diners.
Well, I really felt like that detail brought you to the time you were in, more so the swanky kind of coffee shop you could walk into now.
That's so true, yeah.
Yeah.
You wouldn't
Yeah, I don't even think they have leather seats anymore.
No, it's okay. Well, there are scenes, I mentioned Alexander's department store. There are a lot of scenes down there, and I had a lot of real experience, again, growing up in the Bronx, being in that exact place. Including, I'll just give you one, it's not spoiled in the book. One day years ago, on a hot summer day, I was walking on the corner, and a guy was selling like drinks. And I said, okay, I'll have this. And he said, well, do you want a big, a medium, or a little? And I said, well, I'll take a little one. And he slightly frowned at me, poured it. And as I was drinking, he said, you're definitely going to want more, right? So I told you, you should have gotten it. So I stuck that in the novel.
Now they're super great.
Question too, Chris?
I was wondering if I could tell a story about alternate reality and P4 and Tell. I gave you a call. I know Frank and Richie. I had no idea what it was about. I went before them, and we went to Rose Hill, and we used to show up very early in the morning at Pete's studio, lazy on window pane, and then we'd walk in with a handful of Jefferson Airplane, Hot Tuna, Grateful Dead, and we'd make them play all these psychedelia albums, and then after work we'd get them over to the big White Castle and meet up. But it was an amazing guy. The problem is, now that you're talking, I keep seeing him as 19 years old. Every time you say the name.
I think he was 19 years old.
Yeah,
all his
we all
life.
were.
That's a charming guy. My first album is, I think, Richie mentioned was that came out in 1972. Before I finally got around to doing my second album in 2020, there were a couple of places in the world that came out with CDs.
Wait, hold on. Yeah. You were getting on this one about him working on his.
Yeah.
So we still understand each other.
That's right.
Exactly.
No, exactly.
Oh my God.
I'm still going to get on but so anyway, so on this, so I think it was a place in Korea, not North Korea, South Korea, came out with a CD of the album, and they wanted some bonus tracks, okay? So Twice Upon a Rhyme already has 13 songs. I put on 2 additional songs. One was a song that exists only in demo form called Murray the K's Back in Town. It's about the disc jockey Murray the K. Murray the K's back in town. You can listen to just that song on Spotify. It's up there. Anyway, so when I got the CD, one day I decided, you know what, I already knew Pete a little. So I went by the studio and I said to Pete, hey Pete, you might want to play something from this LP, and I have like no shame. He said, sure.
You might want to play.
You might want to play this.
Anyway, like later that week, Pete did a set on disc jockeys, which he probably already had in mind already. There was songs about DJs, and I was absolutely thrilled that he played Murray the K's Back in Town. I'll say, by the way, you heard Dennis Els's name being mentioned?
Yes.
How many times do you think Dennis Elsis has played any of my songs?
How many times did you ask him to?
Probably about 150. I've given up already. I thought by putting him in the novel, maybe he might. I didn't help either. I actually had a conversation with Dennis. I did, by the way, call Dennis House and say, I hope it's okay you're in the novel. He said, yeah. So I said, don't sound too excited about this. Yeah, I don't usually like alternate realities.
What a guy. Well, I was thinking we could all take a selfie.
Oh, you got one more question, Miles?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, that was fun, and I see you can buy your book here.
Hold it up high! Hold it up high!
And my question is, are you selling your CDs here too?
No, but I can leave some more for you. Yeah.
Good idea. What you're doing.
No, I unfortunately have a lot of extra CDs.